Hello, everyone. It's Angelo Robles, host of the Angelo Robles podcast and the founder of Family Office Association. Many of you know I have done kind of from 0 to 100, maybe a little bit curvy going through it, not perfectly straight, but extremely active, really since COVID or a little after COVID in the world of digital assets. I've not done as much as I would like, and I think a very important aspect of it. And with the news of Facebook's name change that came out last week, I don't think it could be more timely to do something on the metaverse. So today we're very fortunate. We're going to feature a special session. What is the metaverse? And it'll go much deeper than that. But I got to keep my title short, so that kind of works. It features Sly Lee, who's a partner at Emerge. And Sly, welcome back, I might add, to the show.
Thank you so much, Angelo. Excited to be here.
Now, Sly is a real entrepreneur. He's been active as an entrepreneur, has a wonderful base of investors. And we're going to go really deep in terms of the educational aspect today of the metaverse. And we'll talk a little bit about specifically what he's doing and how it all ties in together and really makes it kind of, pardon the pun on the metaverse play, but kind of really come to life with all your senses. We'll get to that a little shortly. Sly, why don't we start? I guess we all could define it a little differently, but to you, what is the metaverse? I mean, the most traditional definition, physical, augmented, and virtual reality in a shared online space, but that sounds like it's from an encyclopedia. What does it mean to you?
You know, it's so funny, Angelo, because I've heard many attempts to try to define the metaverse, and how I perceive the metaverse currently is sort of like a wormhole. We're going into this next era of how we interact online in digital spaces, but similar to some of these phenomena, it's really hard to, put your finger on it. It's really defined by what's happening around it. And honestly, and I'm not trying to dodge the question, but I suspect that the best definition will come many years down the road, maybe even decades down the road, just as now a decade or even more after the mobile phone era, we're able to define mobile computing, and maybe even just recently define the internet, even though it did come online many decades ago. And it's funny you mentioned that definition, which seemed very encyclopedic, because I think the best definition I've seen so far was by Matthew Ball, and he wrote a many thousand-word essay to try to define it. So I don't think that there is a good, concise definition of it, but I think it can be well agreed upon by most people in the industry that the metaverse is this new era of the internet, and it's not replacing how we interact online, but really enhancing it. And it's manifested with all of the enabling technologies, some of which you mentioned in terms of digital assets and goods, blockchain, 5G, full body presence, and hopefully even other senses.
Oh, for sure. I mean, this probably brings in the Web3 and NFTs a little bit into it, and they do kind of all sync together. You could also define it to some degree as it's artifacts for a community. It's shared networks where, I mean, I would probably go with the verbiage, and this is so different from, say, Web 1 and Web 2, where there's digital scarcity. Now, that probably does bring the NFT picture into it. But again, this all kind of ties together. I think important for the audience is right now, how do we access, how do they experience? And I've done it in various ways, which I'll explain after your answer. But how do I access the metaverse now? And if you wanted to jump a little bit of what you think the near future could look like, I'd love to listen.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there might be a lot of over hype around how one, interacts with the metaverse. But as Tim Sweeney likes to say, who's the CEO of Epic, people have been building the metaverse now for many years and laying the foundation, and they were doing it even on mobile phones before the smartphone era. I think a lot of people are actually interfacing with the metaverse now without potentially even labeling it as such. And
for sure,
discussing this the other day about your involvement with digital art and NFTs is for sure within the realm of metaverse. And similar to how we were struggling to define it just now, I think many facets of online behavior now, in terms of real-time connection, digital assets, decentralization of information, real-time communication, could be considered interacting with the metaverse. And it's really interesting that most of Generation Z nowadays, and what for sure brought it up to my mind, early last year, in terms of different types of behaviors online within metaverse worlds, or companies like Roblox, where
For
it's
sure.
considered mostly a kids game and creator platform where you could build little mini games and share with your friends and monetize. Really became, I think, a good case study and sort of flagship to cause people to look a little bit closer, to say this is more than just a game here. There's an economy built into the world, into the gameplay. Users create the content for themselves. There's this sort of decentralization aspect when it comes to that, as opposed to big AAA gaming studios, funding and then developing and dictating what is fun or the current hit game. And so I suspect that every interaction that's happening this year and onwards, and even since last year, is really going to be looked back upon as the early days of this wave of the metaverse.
Yes. And I would say from my experiences, and you mentioned the company behind it, Epic Games, I have a teenage son, and it was probably 3 years ago that Fortnite really came from nowhere. This private company, this interactive game company that really caught the world by storm. And that company is making money for those private owners like there's no tomorrow. It's private, so we don't always know the exact numbers. But I would say Fortnite, Roblox. I'm a terrible game player, by the way. So my son likes to have a good record relative to others. When he plays me, his win total really goes up pretty quick. So Fortnite, Roblox, Minecraft, that would be probably among the most classic.
Mm-hmm.
If you're those of you that still may be scoffing a little bit about that, realize that Gen Z is a massive generation. They're very different. Millennials kind of relate partially to the Gen Z. They're also a much bigger generation than my Gen X. They're extremely impactful. There's more people that play Fortnite, not even factoring in the other games. There's more people that play Fortnite, and I don't mean just once a year, quasi consistently. I think that was defined as 4 times a month, something like that, than play soccer. I was going to say football, but our international audience would be a little confused. Soccer is much bigger internationally, and basketball combined. I mean, you're really underestimating, and that is the earliest stages, the really raw kind of look at what the metaverse potentially could be. Now, I hate to get a little game centric on the audience. I don't know how much you dabble yourself, Sly, but the opportunity for interoperability, and I don't think we're there yet within games, meaning we create an avatar and we're able to cross over to various platforms. That will require some level of syncing, adaptation by these different companies, but we're trending in that direction.
Yeah, the concept of interoperability is pretty interesting one, because if you remember, say 5-10 years ago, the concept of big data was really popular, and honestly, from my perspective, it became difficult for people to parse information from all of that data. And as we move now into this era of the metaverse, I suspect that a lot of that data is going to be very useful to drive that interoperability. And
yes,
I really like the example Matthew Ball actually states, which is Disney, the real manifestation, Disneyland, benefits from allowing you to come into Disneyland and wear your own clothes. You don't have to wear Disney clothes once you enter Disneyland itself physically, but you have the option to buy Disneyland branded content and clothing while you're in the park. And so I also don't think that this, in the digital world, there will be this manifestation where it's a one-to-one transfer necessarily, because there's so much with regard to even style and the physics and look and feel of a specific game, say even between Fortnite and Roblox. Those are very different feelings of gameplay, but there will be some type of metadata that will need to be transferred, and probably already is in some way. If you think about multi-user sign-on through various platforms, where they are transmitting some primitive data about your age, what maybe basic preferences you have. And so all of that interoperability, I think, is one of the statutes and key pillars of the metaverse, to seamlessly flow in between different worlds. Actually, I think maybe coming back to the attempt to define the metaverse, I keep coming back to that word, which is the ability to flow seamlessly between different experiences digitally, and even digitally and physically. And that actually physical digital barrier starting to be blended a little bit is actually what excites me the most. It also is like perhaps what's one of the most concerning parts of the metaverse, which is why we have to be very careful as we build it.
Oh yeah, we're gonna, and trust me, audience, we're gonna get pretty deep and go into some of that relatively shortly. Some of you may wonder, this Fortnite became so popular. They make, I mean, literally a truckload of money, multiple billions and billions and billions. They don't do it from charging for the game. They give that away for free. Really, their only monetary model is what's known as skins inside the game. You play, you win, you're rewarded, or you can buy into various skins. And that, I'm telling you, it's going to be hard for some of you to wrap your arms around this unless you have young ones that are into this and they're native to it. This is their, what we might have worn in the 80s as sneakers, and the digital version of that is effectively skins. In the NFT world, we're seeing that with CryptoPunks and people using that as their online profile in, say, Twitter. Yeah, that's only probably worth a couple of 100,000 to a couple of million. It's like, every generation has problems with understanding kind of where the puck is headed, using a Wayne Gretzky quote. But to ignore this digital acceleration, what's happening in Web3. I'm not even going to talk about cryptocurrencies and tokens, but what's happening in Web3, what's happening in NFTs, what's happening in the metaverse. I'm leaving out DeFi. That requires its own deep dive. I mean, this is extraordinary. And I just want my audience, my people, to not be left behind, not even just from an investment opportunity, but that's a part of it, but just simply from functioning and thriving, I guess you could say, in today's society, to maybe take things away from games to where the metaverse could be impactful that a more traditional audience may understand. Talk to us a little bit about how during COVID, a lot of musical superstars did concerts in the metaverse with their image or avatar. Work environments could be more metaverse centric. An organization like mine that hosts events, how events and conferences could be way more interactive than the Zoom that we're doing today. Why don't I give that to you?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting example that you mentioned with regard to concerts, because I was thinking of that example when you were mentioning the maybe some people being averse or even scoffing at the concept of digital goods or behavior or experiences. And I would say personally, I see it as each generation, there's been this sort of shift in some foundational new technology and a challenge to the status quo. And I would say maybe the previous generation might have been mobile computing. There was a lot of concern of people looking down at these little small rectangles and being sucked into them, and the behaviors on them being very different than the desktop computing and internet era. I would actually go back even further and say all of the behaviors now with regard to digital assets and goods and NFTs and art is very similar, I think, in human desire to customize and find beauty in things. And remember, even back in the brick phone days, we used to buy, and I'm just barely old enough to remember this and doing
Yeah,
this.
like you're too young. Have you know?
I just barely remember this, and doing this is buying ringtones. And the 99-cent ringtone was a really big deal to customize your identity and your experience in interacting with other people, and even people around you. When they heard your ringtone, they thought something of you, depending on what your ringtone was. And so I see this just movement into the digital manifestation of value and assets and experiences as a natural extension. In some ways, like most technologies do, and most technologists do, it jumps the shark every now and then. It's a little humorous, and then it comes back to center. During the pandemic, with 13 million people, I think it is 13 million odd people that concurrently joined the Travis Scott concert, on Epic's platform at Fortnite, was pretty, I think it was a surprise for a lot of people to see how many people would actually attend a concert virtually, because I think there was this natural inclination to say a concert's about the in-person experience. And I'm a musician, I love music, and I play a few instruments myself. And there is something lacking with a digital concert, but in Fortnite, in a 3D environment with community members that with the ability to customize that experience to some level, I think the timing was just right with everything with regard to people being really disconnected from people they care about, their communities, people being bored and missing these in-person events, feeling the energy from the crowd. And Fortnite definitely enabled some level of that feeling of presence, but it's just the beginning, which is so exciting. Right now, we are seeing in that exact example, digital concerts, it's really cool for a little bit, but then you do feel that, hey, there's something not quite right with it. I still feel a little bit limited in just, the ability to perceive or have these experiences on a 2D screen, or even if you are in 3D, just the 3D visuals and audio.
Yeah, like you brought up a good point, and we're going to get to some of that on how hardwares and others are going to really dive into that experience. But even now, you are experiencing the metaverse without doing that in some of the games like Fortnite that we noted. Yes. And the concert that you noted was pretty amazing. Look at the millions and millions of people. And when I mention things like skins in games, it's not like they make you play better. It is simply just a look and a status symbol. Mm-hmm. The way a certain brand of a watch or a shirt, that doesn't make you a better person or smarter. It simply makes you, I guess, feel better inside, and a status symbol. It's the same for these, hundreds and hundreds of millions around the world that are playing games, well, way more than that, and how this is really important to them. And when this evolves, especially with the interoperability and all that, they'll be able to possibly still own the skin, but lease it out for a day, profit from it. I mean, there's going to be lots of interesting developments to probably get a little extra weird on our audience. So there's a couple of platforms like Decentraland and Sandbox. I mentioned those two because people that are active in cryptocurrencies and tokens know that they could effectively, broadly have activity with those two platforms easily through some of the traditional crypto exchanges that they may use. So something like the Sandbox, the rapper Snoop Dogg, purchased a plot and built a house. Now, audience, this is going to be a little hard to wrap your arms around. Guess what happened to the houses or the plots of land around a famous, I was just going to say rapper, he really is an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. They skyrocketed. People are paying real money for this. I'm not making this up. Like, this is really early stages. Sometimes with crypto, I talk about that we might be in baseball, the top of the first inning. When it comes to what we're talking about here, in some ways, I'm not even sure they even played the national anthem yet. This is really early. You might have noticed and saw that, and like that whole, even around you, there may be people that like, what is this, like, real? Are people really spending real money to do that? The answer is they are.
Yeah, that's an interesting case study there, Angelo, in that I'm at an interesting age, I think. So I'm 32, I'm a millennial. I'm just in between the two generations where I have tendencies that align with both. And one of my first instincts, and maybe being a first generation son of immigrants as well, sort of thought some of these things were a little bit silly. However, if you think about it a little bit, how people in the past have spent their money on goods, a car, a nice suit, a pair of shoes, their house, even, to fulfill their own, sense of belonging or happiness is not really much different in doing that digitally. And even if you think about the concept of spending real money on something not real that's digital, what is money? The concept of currency is already architected within an agreement of society, which is no different than spending on something that's real or not real. These digital experiences are real for many people. And I saw a study recently, actually a survey that said a majority of Gen Z do not distinguish between real life and online in terms of experience,
sure.
perhaps the value that they see from it.
I mean, since you're into music, I mean, even there's like these singing avatars that you're starting to see, let's go with in the metaverse, that are being AI generated.
Mm.
I think right now you could kind of tell, but it's so inevitable. And I don't mean 10 years, I don't know, 6 months, a year and a half, where you won't even be able to tell anymore. I mean, they'll actually, again, I'm going to get a little crazy on the audience. They'll have Twitter profiles.
Mm.
They'll be posting and responding, and it's not a real human. They're already pretty darn good at the music, but I agree it's not quite there yet, but it's getting really close.
Yeah, actually, it already has happened, but in very niche circles. So Little Michaela
Yeah.
used to be owned by Bread, and which has now been acquired by Dapper Labs, had 1 million or a few million Instagram followers. And what was interesting about that, and if you followed that story of Little Michaela and her journey, is it was well publicized, and people knew who was following her that she was not real. She was very intently designed and architected celebrity.
Right.
And yet people still followed her and engaged with her posts and really resonated with, empathized with her journey and her story. So undoubtedly there are many more AIs that entertain us today. And I don't think that's actually necessarily a bad thing. It does bring up the interesting concept of what is authentic, to your point on deep fakes, which you might have been alluding to, where it might be difficult to tell the difference between who is the real, president of the United States and who's the virtual one, because now technology is so good where you can overlay and a virtual face onto someone and speak in the voice of someone else. I actually know some people that are working on deepfake technology, and their take is especially interesting on it, where a lot of the doomsday scenarios that you imagine, the president of the United States deep faking and pretend and insult, and someone pretending to be the president insulting the president of another nation and starting a nuclear war. A lot of the people in the industry don't think that would ever happen because there are so many vested interests and checks and balances, and there'd be so many fact checkers behind that it would prevent any catastrophic issues. But what is actually more concerning, I think, is when it happens in everyday people's lives that don't have those resources. And there's been a few examples of that already, where a reporter was deep faked and her name dragged through the mud and reputation, and there was some really explicit content that was shared online, essentially deep faking her face on other people's bodies, and she is just a regular citizen, couldn't do much about that. So I think there will be, I'm glad that people are thinking about that, because people that are not the president of the United States will be targeted for some of these deep fake, hackers, if you will. And that'll be the next generation of hacking, is like digital physical identity. But that's what's so great about having these conversations right now, is because I think you see what has happened when social media really came of age and became scale without these considerations. And you're seeing a lot of the issues online. But now with the metaverse, I do feel like there are many discussions that are being had, which is fantastic to help prevent any, Black Mirror scenarios.
It's funny that you brought up the example you did relative from, deep fakes and hacks and all that. So if I thought about it, you thought about it. When we talk a little bit about uniquely what you're doing, I think there's incredible potential for what I'm going to call triple level biometrics relative to an NFT inside what you're doing. If you're not doing it yet and you guys run with it, can I have 1% royalties on it? We'll get to that. We will get to that one shortly. So I'm going to share it with the world. So if you're not going to do it, someone else is. So you better do it. I would say we're about 5 or 10 minutes from that. So it's coming. So, I mean, going back a little bit, and I know it's hard for generations in my generation to get this, but for a lot of people in this community, they like to be what's called anon. That's anonymous. You're seeing that more and more in the Twitter sphere and Twitter, with that being the case. So here's something that we see in the social media realm. We see the fact that as influencers and creators, we have zero power. If Twitter, if YouTube, with really no rhyme or reason, it's their call, wanted to deplatform you, you could possibly try and appeal. It is strictly up to them. Now, I'm probably talking more Web3 and NFTs here than the metaverse, but they do tie together. We're going to be heading to where with Web3, the internet is going to be owned by users and builders and orchestrated, I guess you could say, like Chris Dixon talks about, with tokens. DAOs are going to come up, and that's going to become more popular with governance by those that are actual stakeholders in it. We're not there yet, but we're probably on the cusp of going back to that issue of being deplatformed per the discretion of whatever Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, etc., to portable avatars, where that's on the blockchain we develop as creators are following, and we can't be deplatformed. That kind of follows us. There are actually, I guess, with BitClout and some others, there's variations of that now, but we're not quite there yet. So like, you must see this intersection because you're so active in earlier stage in digital assets of how Web3, NFTs, and the metaverse are all kind of coming together and giving creators power that they absolutely never had before.
Yeah, it's interesting that there's so much to unpack there, Angelo, with regard to, wow, I'm not even sure where to start, because what actually came to mind was obviously the responsibility and the high standards that we do hold a lot of these very large, wealthy companies. And we're building a company ourselves, and we're thinking about these things, about how to act responsibly and build technology for, you know, the good of humanity, which is what we were just discussing. Because if not, then what is this all for in the end? And it is definitely not an easy question to answer with regards to what is the right platform has to deplatform one of its users that they monetize from, while also, you know, building the platform and holding checks and balances for the good of humanity. And that the concept of followers following you, the creator, as opposed to, you know, just on that one platform is very interesting and for sure inevitable. And I would say already happening to some degree.
Right, to some degree.
Not at scale. Just recently, actually, I supported my first artist on Patreon, who makes physical goods. He makes surfboards, and as a surfer,
Nice.
really liked the concept of learning how to make things physically and also digitally. And we follow him, or I follow him on multiple platforms, and I am loyal to him as the artist, not necessarily just on Instagram or just on Twitter, or not just on YouTube. And so I think Patreon has grown substantially since the pandemic as well for a lot of these artists. But
it has.
Moving into more digital art and in the combination within the realm of the metaverse, I think it is inevitable. And I think it is probably a net positive for the creator themselves. I think there needs to be a conversation around the mental wellness of these creators, because if you talk to a lot of these creators and influencers and streamers, if you talk to Twitch streamers, you make money when you're online. And some of these streamers are on for 12 hours at a time. And when they're offline, there's so much FOMO that's built up around not being on, because now all the streamers have gone to another channel. And I think the creator economy is a net positive one with regards to letting people fulfill their own, you know, personal legends and their own desires. But there does need to be conversation around what is the value of your own time, people's time, and human life with regard to needing to always be switched on these platforms versus being able to live as well, and really about thriving.
That's an excellent point on mental health awareness, and you're correct. there is a lot of challenges with a lot of people from that aspect of the community. We actually covered that about 2 weeks ago with Robin Williams' son, Zach,
Wow.
who's active in the digital asset space and an entrepreneur as well. I'm assuming a lot of people, maybe yourself or others in the community, or for the audience listening in, they're probably familiar with Ready Player One. Is that a book that inspired you? And for those that may not be familiar with it, it did really take an amazing look at the future, what we're kind of now calling the metaverse. It was called Ready Player One. What did that mean to you?
You know, Ready Player One, it was a good book and it was an okay movie. Um,
Okay, yeah.
what was even better than Ready Player One was Snow Crash, where the
Oh,
term
Snow Crash is great.
first came up. But I would definitely say Ready Player One is very digestible as a book. It's a very fun read. There's really good 80s nostalgia in there, which is fun as well, which is something I, barely experience, which is why I did like the book. But Snow Crash was written in, say, 1990, 1991 by Neil Stephenson. And that's where the term metaverse was first coined.
Mhm.
And it's a fantastic book if people haven't read it in its own right, actually outside this conversation. It's such a good sci-fi novel. And in the book, Snow Crash is actually a virus that you can get, in the physical and digital worlds. And I'll leave it there to avoid any spoilers. But in that book, the metaverse was just in VR. And what's more interesting is obviously not just in VR experience like we've been talking about today, but I was appreciative of Ready Player One to bring it to the masses because it, had a huge box office hit and really had people start thinking. I think it was the matrix of this generation, people to start talking about what does a digital life look like? What is the worth of a human in the physical world? Which life is more important? Which society is more valuable? And I think the obvious answer is neither one nor simultaneously all of them are important, because this reality is just one we exist in because it persists the longest now. But all of the digital interactions online and experiences are also valuable because we live in them each day.
Now, I mentioned games like Fortnite, Roblox, Minecraft. You don't need to have any visuals. It's not, I mean, if you're going to expect that to be the metaverse, like it comes to life in 3D, you could see, feel, and touch it, that will disappoint you. But it is a part of the earlier stages of the metaverse. And again, it's getting what was really our younger audiences, the Gen Z, used to that. And as it progresses, what I'm getting at is there is a perception. I mean, I purchased the Oculus probably maybe 3 years ago. So it's that big bulky set you got to put on. I mean, it was cool, but it was a little bit laborious. Of course, it's not natural. We're inevitably trending towards glasses, towards contacts, may make some others cringe, but implants, and even perhaps nothing, but just the whole aspect of 3D in the metaverse, I guess you could say, just getting better. But there is one thing that relates a little bit to what you're doing. Okay, that's the visual aspect, but we have other senses other than visual. For some of us, actually, and of course, sound, but we have the ability to touch. And that's what brings an object or something, I guess you could say, to life. Why don't you talk a little bit about, from the hardware aspect, if you wanted to cover, the glasses part, and kind of what you're doing relative to the touch part and why that's so important for us as humans?
Yeah, I really like this topic of hardware in the metaverse because a lot of what is going to be enabled in the next, say, 10 to 20 years will be enabled by new hardware manifestations. It won't all be here on this tiny little rectangle of glass. There is going to be the next era of computing past mobile. And that excites me because this is where really big shifts in humanity have taken place, the way I see it with regard to digital interactions. If you imagine, say, 200, 300 years ago, we moved from analog communication across distance, like beating a drum to, loudspeaker, to electrical signals with the telegram. And then we digitized our voices real time. And then in the 50s, 60s, we digitized visuals. We were able to see someone in a video call. And now it's even more prevalent than ever with regard to the last 2 years during the pandemic and Zoom calls. But I think it would obviously be a waste if we moved into another era of digital interaction and we're still limited to technology from the 1950s, 60s of visuals and audio. We have five senses. I personally don't think we'll ever reach smell-o-vision, the ability to smell in the virtual world. And the reason is there are other parallel technologies that are moving much faster, like brain-computer interfaces that'll just tap into the brain and just enable you to smell a field of sunflowers. But touch is an interesting one. Touch is one where it's so natural and intuitive, and you see it every day, I'm sure, in your lives. You miss someone dearly. You miss holding someone's hand. My neighbor, I was walking our dog with our neighbor today, and she told me her husband just passed away a month ago. I didn't have any words to offer her. I reached over and I squeezed her shoulder. Touch is just so powerful in communicating these emotions in the real world, and in digital worlds, you see this missing. You see it lacking. I know many of you have stories where you just want to reach through the screen and hold the hand on the other side. If you're talking with your loved one, your child, your parent, your best friend. And so we do think that touch is going to be enabled in the real world. And Facebook just published something today with regard to enabling remote touch through some robotic skins. So that's what we've been really interested in the last few years. And I was talking with Matthew Ball about this exact topic recently of hardware in the metaverse and touch. And he also agrees that, if you do believe that presence is important in the metaverse, which it is, well, then the sense of touch is paramount to enable that presence. It's the next quantum leap. It's the next 10x leap to enable you to feel present. We have 3D today. It's fantastic. We have low latency. It's fantastic. We have concurrency of millions of people at the same time. It's great. But still, you're limited to just seeing someone, hearing someone, and you're kind of stuck at the screen. And so we've been building technology that enables you to physically feel virtual objects. And we've taken a unique approach that I won't go too deep into today. There's more on our website if you want to check it out. But we enable that sense of touch without requiring a user to wear anything at all. And right. The gloves, the haptic suits, these are all been attempted for the last 50 years. But it's just so much friction for the user to require them to put on a glove. Angela, you and I aren't wearing gloves today to feel the virtual worlds, but they exist in the world. You can buy them, but they won't be consumer enough because the friction is a little bit too high. And so we're really excited about what happens when you enable the sense of touch digitally. And I'm actually speaking at TEDx Boston in a few days to talk about this.
And nice. No, that's a amazing product, I guess, or hardware, if I could call it that you're building out within that community that, again, touches on a really important sense to really make it come to life, I guess you could say, for people. Now, back to that idea that I mentioned earlier, probably to the effect of kind of cybersecurity effectively, which I think is huge. And it's probably a little bit of a stretch. I don't think even with 5G, we really have the power yet, but we're trending there. Could your product in the future interact with NFTs? Now, a lot of our audience is going to think, Angelo, there you go again. These are JPEGs. Well, digital art is huge. And if it was just that, that would be massive. And to this generation, how they flex and all that's going on, that is important to them. But NFTs are so much more than that, so much more. We won't do a deep dive into that today, but specifically onto the idea. Imagine that your product, I guess via an NFT, becomes a sign-in where biometrically, which would be very hard to quote unquote duplicate, like the hologram, let's say that pops up and it reads your eyes, your hands, you touch it, it reads the biometrics of your hands and perhaps your voice. I mean, that's like triple biometric verification. Is that potentially the future of what your product or others could become?
Yeah, there's a few questions within that. Within the biometrics question, I've really leaned into understanding my own data, and I've done 23andMe, and I know there's some people that are concerned about their data, their DNA being online, and it's already available. If people, if someone really wanted to do harm, your hair, you leave it around everywhere. Every time your hair falls off your head or your skin's flakes off. I'm really interested in the concept of identity. Even if we just stay there for a second, who are you? If you ask most people this question, they'll tell you their name, tell you where they were born, what's their profession, but that's not really who you are. And so that's a conversation of philosophy. I'd love to discuss another time. We could spend a whole nother hour just on that. But representing you digitally is also equally as interesting. And there's a few companies that are running under their radar, I think, that are doing some pretty interesting things without them being even discussed. One of the biggest companies I think that's going to be key in biometric data is Clear. Clear is the company that you see at airport lines when you want to skip the line. They want you to become your identity card, and they're collecting your biometric data, your eyes and facial scans to attend things like concerts and games in person and pass through airport security. So there are a few companies that are attempting to digitize and collect your digital identity to be that kind of pass holder. And that's whatever company does that successfully will be extremely valuable. With regard to what we're doing, we're really interested in the sense of touch, yes, for identity, for communicating that identity, to feel present in a moment or an experience with one another. And within the specific question you asked on NFTs, we have been contacted by a few NFT artists that are that have been quite successful in the space. Because once you bring the sense of touch into the artistic expression or creation and even experience, imagine you can reach out and physically feel an orb, and it feels different on different sides, and you can customize it depending on a variety of factors. You could really start to tie that into biometrics. So maybe that orb feels differently depending on how you're emotionally feeling today. If you're feeling a little bit anxious, maybe it's a little spiky of an orb. If you're feeling really calm and centered, it feels really therapeutic and nice and like a massage on your hand. Maybe you could share that with somebody else. Maybe my loved one on the other side of the world can actually perceive how I'm doing emotionally today through the sense of touch. Because after all, touch is extremely perceptive. You can understand how someone is feeling today just by the simple squeeze of the hand or putting your hand on their shoulder. So yeah, we're pretty excited about this, platform that we've built in the hands of creators and builders, and especially the realm of art. It's funny because art is, a lot of people might struggle with the concept of value in a digital piece of art. And when you ask why, they say, well, you can't touch it. It's not real. But what happens if you can touch the digital art all of a sudden with our technology? Then what's the barrier? And so we're pretty excited about what, new capabilities we can unlock with artists here pretty soon.
Can, in the future, potentially with your product and tying into the NFT that I noted, can you record an experience and create an NFT with that? I'm assuming you will be able to.
I love this question, Angela. And this actually extends even beyond NFTs. So the mantra of our company is we want to create a future where distance and time don't stand in the way of feeling present. We talk about distance a lot. Now, you just asked a question about time, which is really interesting. So not only can you record an experience, and that's part of the NFT, but imagine you record an experience that, say, 10, 20, 50, 100 years ago, or 100 years in the future, someone will be able to experience you. That's called a memory now. And what happens when you can experience memories fully that you've had 10 years ago, or maybe that you never even experienced? And so that's where we think it gets really interesting when you start digitizing these experiences and playing with the concept and bridging time as well as distance.
A little bit of a touchy question. Let's get to it. Many of the audience knows about a week ago, Mark Zuckerberg made what I think is a very, very smart move. Pretty amazing in terms of his entrepreneurial capability, in terms of changing or about to change the name of Facebook to Meta. You and I know, and some of my audience, a anonymous person with his CryptoPunk on Twitter. He came from nowhere and is a big star now. It's known as CryptoPunk 6529. And I know to part of my audience, they're saying, what the hell are you talking about, Angelo? Just ignore that part for a second. Here's the big question. He stated his view is that the default outcome of the metaverse will be centralized.
Hmm.
Does that concern you? Does it matter in our everyday lives?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a concern and one of the biggest topics of discussion that many of us are discussing currently. I'm a co-chair for the World Economic Forum for AR/VR, and what we discuss are what we're about to discuss very soon are what are the topics that need to be really grappled with for the next 2 years. And this is one of the core tenets, which is the metaverse should not be controlled by a single entity. And what I found comical actually from the company formerly known as Facebook's announcement was they agreed with that, and then they went and changed their name to Meta.
I just thought, yeah, that is ironic.
I just found it very funny, but also very bold. I have to give credit to Zuckerberg for that.
Oh, no doubt.
Extremely bold to say, not only are we going to devote 20% of our workforce to AR, VR, which is really the frontier of the next era of computing in the metaverse, but now we're going to change 100% of the company energy into this world. And it is interesting because I think a lot of people are up in arms about it. I think it actually is going to be net positive for the industry and the world, because good things happen when you talk about it and when we really challenge what is happening. And I don't think it would be good if one company controlled the metaverse. I think it's going to be I think it is going to be an uphill battle to prevent it, because it's hard to compete with $1 trillion. We're a startup and we've raised tens of millions of dollars, but that's nothing compared to $1 trillion. And so when you look at the rate a lot of these companies are acquiring other companies, it does seem to be more likely, if I was put on my statistics hat for a second, it seems statistically more probable that the metaverse might be controlled by a few large entities, similarly to how a lot of these telcos are pseudo monopolies. There's 2 or 3 competitors in the space. Now, with decentralization and Web 3.0, I think there is a fighting chance for the alternative reality to exist, where it really is not controlled by majority stakeholders. But then it comes to the point what you were talking about earlier of who controls the communities. Is it the platform that controls the influencer, the content creator, and with them all their community, or is the creator in charge? And I think the more we steer towards the creator being in charge, the more decentralized the metaverse could be. And this, once again, goes in full circle again, and everything happens in circles, in cycles, as we know, in waves. It has to do with the current economy that we've set up as society, and what is the value of a dollar, which is changing now with everything that you're deeply a part of with regard to NFTs and cryptocurrency and alternative currencies. And so I think it's an exciting time to be alive, an exciting time to be working and investing in the space. I'm hopeful that the company formerly known as Facebook does not control the metaverse. They are investing dollars, though, in the right areas. We'll say that to be a significant part of the metaverse at the very least.
Yeah, continuing in what 6529 said, which is kind of what you said, is a risk. Big tech has the money, the talent, the massive reach. Facebook has billions of users. If they were their own country, I think they would be smaller than China by number of users, but maybe more than India. It's huge.
So it's actually 3 billion people.
Oh, so then it is more, period.
It's massive.
I mean, they may have the full support and encouragement of nation states to exercise more control, not less control. Okay, let's not, now that we've scared all of you about what our future could look like, we'll bring it back a little bit to something a little lighter. Are games the future of work? I mean, I look at, even on platforms or exchanges that I could invest in, Axie Infinity. Then you have others that I can't quite yet, I guess, Gods Unchained, and coming up in Solana is going to be Aurora. I mean, there's people making money effectively playing video games. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be aspects of that are going to get more intense and more serious. And it's like everything that we know, Sly, it's changing and changing really quick.
Mm. Yeah, it is interesting. I read an article around, I think it might have been Axie Infinity specifically, in Malaysia, perhaps, or in the Philippines, people making $10.
Philippines, yes.
Philippines making $10, $12 a day. And that's playing these video games. And it's more than what they could be, selling some physical good. It does bring up an interesting philosophical question, which is, are we already just playing a big game in the real world with how we make money? I would say the answer is yes. But more concretely, in terms of the future of work, say the next 5 years, I would say that both definitions are changing. The definition of work is changing already, like you just mentioned a few of those games, and then the definition of a game is changing. I would definitely not consider Roblox a game anymore, where I think a lot of people that looked at them 2 years ago, they said, this is a kid's game. It's not. It has its own currency. It's its own creator platform.
Yes.
Learn in it. And so what is a game anymore? What is fun anymore? I have a ton of fun building Emerge, this company. Is that work? I don't think it's necessarily work. Actually, a lot of my inspiration I draw from very non-techie leaders, like the CEO of Patagonia. And he likes to cite this quote that a life worth lived, well lived, is one where a man or a woman does not distinguish between work or play. He or she does both equally without distinction and delineation. And so I think for the practical answer, it's yes. I think the future of work is already becoming gamified and blended with the game. The definition of what is fun and what is a game is also being really, mixed in with productivity. And then also what is considered productive. I think back in the day, it was productive to go out, get a job, work 8 hours in the field, which I have done because I grew up in Mississippi and shoveling dirt and manure. But now being productive could be considered, developing a piece of art that brings somebody else joy. And so it's an exciting time. It's an exciting time, Angela.
It sure is. I know you're down to about 3 or 4 minutes. I'll give a comment. You may have a comment, then let our audience know how they could learn more about Emerge. So, and I forgot, I don't have who to properly give the quote to, so pardon me, but I just read it and it was really startling. The metaverse is the moment in time when our digital life is worth more to us than our physical life. Now, he goes on to give some examples of how things have changed radically in the last 30 years. Most of us, our attention was dedicated probably 99% to the physical world. TVs became more popular in the 50s through the 70s, and that probably knocked it down to about 85%. Computers then helped to knock down that interaction with the physical world down to 70%. And phones and how we use them now as effectively handheld computers down to about 50%. I guess it's inevitable. The metaverse may knock down for some, maybe our interaction with the physical world down to 10 or 20%. Does this concern you?
It depends what angle you look at it from. I'm a big surfer. I love disconnecting and having zero technology on my body and just going out into the ocean or backcountry woods, which I used to do professionally for some time in Hawaii. It definitely concerns me if one cannot stay centered to reality and what's most important to them. What I find most often is the answer is what's most important to them. What do most people regret not doing enough of, when they're at the very last stages of life, is spending time with family. So I think to the extent that technology usage and disconnection from reality separates people, then it is concerning. But just like you and I are doing now, just like I just did with my grandma yesterday, if we use technology and our interaction online is for that connection or fulfillment of what you desire out of life, then I think it could be good. And actually, this probably flows really well into my closing thought, which is, we opened up this conversation talking about Travis Scott in a digital concert of 13 million people concurrently. There's a lot of discussion around scale when it comes to the metaverse. 5G, have anything you want instantly, 4K, 8K, millions of people. I think that actually the most interesting part of the metaverse to me will be enabled by smaller circles to allow for really meaningful interaction and presence that is not possible today. And we coined this term at Emerge, our company, we call the inner circles, or we call it the interverse. So within the interverse, it's your own little tiny universe with a few people that matter so deeply to you more than anything in the world. what would you do with them if you could reach across the screen and throw a ball back and forth and hold their hand? What do you miss from being in person that you cannot do digitally? Now, don't get me wrong. I think it's going to the massive concurrency and connecting with millions of people, even a million minds at once, will be there eventually. But I think it's even more interesting, even more immediately, especially now, even more relevant today with the continued pandemic, is how do we use the technology being developed today to connect more deeply with people that we care about? And that's what I'll leave you with. And if you want to find out more, check out our website, www.emerge.io.
Excellent. Everyone, this has been Sly Lee, Lee, and he mentioned again, Emerge, EMERGE.io. I encourage you to learn more about it. I think he's a great entrepreneur doing really intriguing things, and go and find out some more. Sly may have to leave because he has a very hard stop. In 1 minute, I'll wrap up. This has been a really great dialogue. I highly enjoyed it. As many of you know, I'm really, really into, let's broadly call it, digital assets, and definitely the metaverse is probably the one that's hardest to define and pin down, but looking longer term may have the most amazing impact. Whether that's good or bad will be for kind of us to integrate, and I guess you could say decide on for ourselves. But there's no question, again, we're not going to go from an analog world to digital, kind of back to analog. Things would really have to go wrong in multiple ways for that could happen. My concern for many of you is less so from an investing side, missing out, but you will. It's just functioning in society moving forward, especially looking 10, 15, 20 years out, because all of this is going to be really an everyday aspect. Central bank digital currencies, we're going to have to get used to wallets, our own cryptocurrencies, the value of NFTs, where our medical records would be on, learning how to access that, safely secure it, the metaverse, DeFi, lending, the challenges banks are going to have, and what DeFi is doing that simply is more direct, the power of DAOs and people taking control. Even if you're not the biggest advocate from looking at it from an investing perspective, it just simply is a direction the world is going. If nothing else, just be more educated about it. Everyone, I'm Angelo Robles, host of the Angelo Robles podcast, the founder at Family Office Association. You can learn more about us and membership at familyofficeassociation.com. I'm active on social media, all the platforms, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and most active on YouTube. Go check us out, subscribe. It's free to our channel, where a fair number of some of our interviews make it up for the general public. We hope you have a chance to enjoy it. Thank you so much. And Sly, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Angelo.
Pleasure.